Well, I'm Howard Berger from Realcomm, and we're at Dexus Place in Sydney, Australia, and we literally, just a few minutes ago, completed our annual Realcomm CIO Forum. Today I am here, and I'll do this a little out of order. I'm here with Mark Hansen, Chief Information Officer at Dexus, and joining us here with Mark on the far end, Sheridan Ware, Chief Information Officer for Charter Hall, and on my immediate left, Louise Monger, Head of Property Management for AMP Capital. Thank you all. The reason we're doing this is since we traveled halfway around the globe to be with some of the most innovative, progressive commercial real estate technologists on the planet, and I do mean here in Australia, we thought we'd take the opportunity to sit down and have a little conversation about the state of the industry from an Australian perspective. One of the things that just immediately hits me, and I've been coming to Sydney for the last 9 years, is the level of engagement, adoption, digital transformation, innovation that I've seen across the industry. And so I guess one of the first things that I'd ask is, just somebody who's looking at this internationally, what do you each see as some of the most innovative commercial real estate projects?
Well, I'm happy to start with that, Howard. Right. So again, thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks for everybody joining us today, and for the event, the Realcomm event. We're really happy to sponsor that, and we think it's really important to drive these kind of conversations and discussions collaboratively across our industry. Thank you. And I think in Australia we do it better than anybody, quite frankly.
And we don't have any bias.
That's a big call.
I would not disagree.
No. In this industry, most of the activity we perform in innovation is really experimental. It's still an emerging industry. And I think what we call prop tech and construction tech, these new terms that are emerging, and we're seeing a lot of investment, there's still a lot of hype in this industry. We as property groups are still learning a hell of a lot. And in doing that, we take every opportunity when we do a new initiative. In our case, the one I'd probably showcase is what we did at 100 Mount Street in North Sydney. Yeah. It's the largest office tower in the north of Sydney, Australia. Now, we do a lot of work in assessing technologies, not just within Australia. And one of the advantages we have, we're not contained to what the Australian industry can deliver from a supply point of view. We are forced in a way to assess what's happening globally. So we experiment a lot. And in that one asset, we delivered around 20 new technology solutions. And probably half of those were either new to the Australian industry or had not been deployed within an office tower globally. Mm-hmm. And I'm not suggesting all of those are going to be a success, but part of what we're doing is experimenting and seeing what actually works in our portfolio, because now we're starting to not just do one-off deployments, we're doing initiatives where we're deploying a whole range of technologies to really drive that customer experience. In that one asset, there's products from Israel, France, Scandinavia, North America, Asia. So there's a real aggregation of new tech. And I think the challenge is first proving it out that it can work in a single deployment, ensuring it can scale across a portfolio, which I don't think anyone is doing well, by the way, and making sure that these things can integrate and interoperate so we can deliver a better experience for the people occupying those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I got from a lot of the Australians that I met in this community years ago was a passion and a lot of curiosity, and the willingness to go out of Australia to find, to really seek out and find potential solutions and bring them back. That curiosity I thought was just amazing.
And I think our willingness as a country to put the people at the center of that curiosity. So the innovation that I would talk about is really what we've done with the Charlie app, which is an app that we give to the occupants, the people who live and breathe and work in our buildings, where we try to put them as much as possible in control of the technologies that we're talking about as we're rolling out more and more prop tech. So that they can control their air conditioning experience. They can automate the coffee order. They can book into a yoga class. Right. And it's really that intersection of people, platforms and place. and how we're allowing the people to be at the center of it and trying to provide a seamless, very frictionless way for them to engage with that space, the services that are available to them in that space as and when they need to, so on demand. And I think that sounds very simple, but as we all know as technologists, incredibly difficult to do, given it's a very, there's not a lot of convergence in what we provide in the prop tech industry at the moment. So I think doing that at a portfolio level is really helping our end occupants to make the best use out of the communities, the places, the services that we're providing to them.
Yeah, and so for us, we're currently building what we're calling a resource booking tool, and that's driven off our flexible workspace strategy and the need for us to be able to offer spaces within our buildings to our customers, but not just customers in that building, but customers across our entire portfolio. So our view is that we can create a resource booking tool where any customer can come in and have access and book. It may be a room, it could be a tennis court, a locker, a space. It might be a wheelchair in a shopping centre ultimately, but the ability to access and book those resources, that we can take payments where we might potentially charge for those resources if they were meeting rooms, really making that a very seamless experience, and the ability for also our customers to integrate their own spaces into that system that would only be available to their users. So to really kind of turn, if you think about meeting room booking in many organisations being a really frustrating experience, and that you need to go looking for the thing that you want, this is about saying what your needs are and being presented with what the options are. So we're really focused on sort of solving that problem, and we talked a bit today about what are the big questions that need answering, and that for us was one of the things that we're working with, and that's with an Australian provider who has been doing that for universities and as well as some key office developments around Australia as well.
That whole question of really getting to know your tenant and creating, especially as IT people, creating that collaborative conversation between the landlord and the tenant to better create those seamless crossovers. That seems to be a relatively new conversation in a lot of circles. Is it different here?
Well, actually, it's interesting hearing you speak then, Howard, because you referred to tenant several times, whereas the language we have here is all about customer.
Yeah.
And it's really embedded in our DNA now. And it's not just Dexus, AMP or Charter Hall, it's in our industry. This is how we think about the services we provide. And it actually changes the way you think about delivering any type of service to your customer, whether it be new technology, innovation, services within the asset itself or in the precinct. We think of customer in everything we do. And what that means is traditionally, I believe property groups would build product and we will build it and they will come type approach. We see a huge opportunity in Australia, and I think we all do this, where we ask the customer what they need first and foremost, and we build solutions to deliver on those needs. And I think that is what really differentiates.
And it's I think a difference between asset value and lifetime customer value.
Yeah.
We've often in property thought as landlords that this is our asset and our metrics are occupancy and rental and incentives and things like this.
That's still the mindset of most of the industry.
Well, I think that's changing in Australia. I think we're saying let's be solution providers. Let's provide space solutions to our customers and measure ourselves on the lifetime customer value. How many different services do they use? So we've got a very diversified platform. So for a retailer, how are we doing retail logistics space? How are we doing office space? And some of those are also investors that co-invest alongside us or where we manage their investments. And we're trying to think about that entire customer relationship and how we can constantly be partnering with them to create better solutions across the range of things, the services that we can provide.
That opens up a whole new set of opportunities or challenges. How is that? How is this kind of new way of interacting with the customer and developing?
Well, I think we heard a lot of that today in the session around, so there's not an RFP that comes to market from any occupier that doesn't include some sort of brief around technology and what their expectations around technology. it doesn't always necessarily translate, but our customers are trying to articulate what they want. Our role is actually to sort of take that and say, this is what we can do, and this is what is possible, and here are the possibilities, and these are the services and outcomes we can provide you. Because there's a lot of jargon, and they're all thinking, we've got to get smart building in there, we've got to get this, we want something, but our role is actually to say, what are the services we can offer, and what are those outcomes, and what are those experiences, and actually to put that back to them. So we're really seeing, I think, a shift in focus, that people who work in technology need to be able to talk that language back to customers, and we're all talking to investors about it, and we're all talking to the major occupiers about it, and all of us at some point are probably being taken along to those various meetings in order to really articulate what the possibilities are and where those strategies are taking us.
And I think that key word is experience, right? It's how am I orchestrating place and the platforms that we're using. I mean, there's certain things around security and things that are just tick the box exercises, but it's how do you orchestrate all of the above to get to a journey for a customer that makes sense for them, that provides the value that they need, that frictionless work experience that they need, so that they can be their very best selves. And I think that Australia is quite advanced in having an experience conversation rather than a technology or a place conversation.
And I think when you refer to customer, we have front of mind understanding what the drivers are for the different types of customers we're talking about here, and we tend to default to the occupant of the space. And we don't just think of it in that regard. We think of the investor, the shareholder, we think of the occupant, we think of the visitor to that space. And in everything we do, every solution we look at, and every experience, is how are we adding value to every one of those customer stakeholders? Not just one, but how does it translate to the investor? So if you can create a better experience for the occupant, then you're translating into better rental return, better returns for the investor. And so what is the outcome you're trying to drive towards? That's first and foremost in the way we think about tech. A lot of organisations, and not so much in Australia, actually just think of, well, how can we rapidly just get a tech in there to show we're doing something
ROI,
smart?
Quick ROI.
Absolutely. We think of it in a completely different dynamic around customer.
I mean, what's behind that? You referred a little bit to the secret. What is the secret sauce here in Australia? What is it? Culture? Is it, and the economic model? Is it superannuation? Is it politics? I don't know. What's the difference?
Aussies love to compete.
Yeah.
We see ourselves continually in a world that we punch above our weight. We see ourselves as the underdog, and because of our isolation, we have to strive a little bit harder to do things better compared to a lot of other markets, and particularly the North American market. I believe we're willing to take on new challenges more. We are willing to challenge the norm more. We're probably less conservative and willing to experiment with new things and take those things on and accept failure. We will learn from that failure, whereas we're not so preoccupied with having to deliver a result every single time, because the more we can experiment and learn, the better we're going to be the next time we do things.
I think it's driven, like we call it the egalitarian culture of Australia. We don't like power. We do believe that things should be distributed. And I think that means in business practice that everyone's idea counts, right? It's not just the person at the top of the tree. The makeup of Australian society is very multicultural. It's just our history. We don't like power. And I think that helps provide a really good breeding ground culturally for us to innovate.
So I would say two things. I would say firstly, in terms of property management, our market has a level of sophistication around customer experience, tech aside, in terms of focus on the customer, having customer services managers, concierging service. These things have been norm in the Australian market for a decade or more. And tech has really been an enabler to enhance those types of services for us. So that's where you're seeing a lot of this customer experience type app and tech. come out of that sophistication, I think, in how we treat property management services as far more than just transactional. The second thing is our neighbours rating scheme is performance-based, not initiative-based or tick the box on things. So we have had a race, and it goes to that competitive spirit, but also we've got published neighbours' performance ratings as to driving energy efficiency, and the cost of energy is far greater in Australia than it is in the US. So there's been economic drivers for us to innovate and drive down that cost, and that has borne a whole suite of technologies around driving operational efficiency in that sort of sector. So I would sort of say customer experience driven out of that sophistication in PM, operational efficiency type tech being driven out of what was the neighbours rating scheme that came out.
We've talked a lot about customer in this conversation, and that we value customer, but how do we derive that value back? How do we measure that value? I mentioned it today in the conversation and one of the panels around how do you actually measure that value back? And it's quite interesting because in Realcomm this year, you ran a CIO forum and you probably had 100 plus people in the room. And I was on one of the panels, and I asked the room, how do they measure how well they're performing to their customers? And I explained that in Australia, we are really focused on things like Net Promoter Score and NPS. And I asked the room how many US-based North American companies are doing NPS. And I think I saw one hand go up in this room. And to me, that really translated that the way we view customer and then the way we measure whether we're doing a good job with our customer, if they're really truly advocates, whether they understand the value we bring to them, and to their business and to their portfolio. We do it through that channel. And I would question how in North America and in other regions, how do they actually know whether they're doing a good job? And how the technology solutions they're providing are actually delivering that value back. And so that's one measure that we use. We use a lot of other measures as well, but...
it's also not a perfect science experiment, really, is it? It's not like you can keep all the variables constant so you can test this one thing and have a hypothesis. I think if you have the right headline measures and you're focused on the right drivers of success around those measures, you can therefore draw a hypothesis that these changes that I made helped us to improve on some of those headline measures, even if they're as basic as tenant retention and occupancy and all of those things that are quite traditional in the real estate space. So I think that it's okay if some of it's intuitive, if we're focused on the right experiments around increasing tenant satisfaction and engagement and productivity in the spaces that we provide.
I think the key thing is there has to be an interest in getting that data and really wanting to understand.
I think that's the point. There has to be a genuine curiosity in what it takes to make sure that our tenant customers are
it's got to be
happy,
real.
engaged, productive, all of those things. And that's not a technology change. That's cultural change. And that's actually often where the people lie, is where the biggest change needs to take place. The technology, in a sense, as a CIO, is the easy part, I think.
And we've talked a fair bit around the conversation that we have with our customers, and what we think differentiates us from other regions around the world. But I'll talk about Australia. What differentiates Australia and Australian REITs from other REITs around the world? And we talk about what we do. But I think if you also look at our customer base in Australia, I think they are significantly more mature in the things that they demand of us. And I'm sure
that's a good point.
Absolutely
that's a good
agree
point.
With that. I absolutely agree with
I'm
that.
sure you would both agree that they are bringing to the table the conversation around what are the differentiators, what are you doing more, particularly in this tech space, to drive value back in their business for staff retention, attracting the best talent, well-being of their people, supporting their strategies for productivity and performance. These are things that we
are having a much higher level conversation than I've seen happen in other markets. around, we don't want a workshop about the design specs.
Yeah.
We want a workshop about the personas and the experiences that those personas are having in our space,
Yeah.
and how we're dialing up the components of place and process and services and platforms to provide for that overall experience. We do have a very, very mature customer base.
Majority of new developments in Australia, the heads of agreement for those customers coming into those assets includes collaboration on tech services. I think where the market may head and what the opportunities are is how can landlords offer certain technology as a service?
Completely
And
agree.
what can they do? What is a base, offering?
Starting
and
to
what
see
are your
that now.
net rents? And then what can we offer? Would you like to tap into these different tech products that we can offer, whether it's a space utilisation or, other things? But that's, I think, the level of sophistication and where the market's heading, and where customers will be able to pick and choose from a shopping list of tech.
In and of itself, I think that will change some of the dynamic of the relationship between a landlord and a tenant as
do
well.
too,
So if you're offering dial-up space utilisation services and they're not having to do the CapEx investment up front on sensor technology, for example, but you then both have a single pane that you're looking through in terms of that utilisation, landlords therefore become less about the lease and more about the solution of, hey, you're shrinking or you're growing. What is it that we can do next for you in our portfolio to enhance your lifetime customer value?
Yeah.
If you look at one of the what I would perceive as the biggest changes in the conversation with customer, if you went back 10 plus years, you would have a landlord signing a lease with a customer, a 5-year plus lease, and you would then find the next conversation would be in that 5 years.
Yeah,
time.
For
Four
lease
and a half
renewal.
years' time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Depending on the size of the
Or to
lease.
fix
Exactly
something
right.
that was broken. Yeah,
That's exactly right. And we see that the demand now that's coming both from the customer, and we're pushing for this, so we're meeting head on, is to have that ongoing dialogue around how you are performing in this space. And this is where technology can really provide a really informative role, because we can measure how well the space is performing, measure the environmental impact to the people, we can measure the occupancy usage and whether the design of the space is really optimised for those customers. These are dialogues that we have not just on a yearly basis, but on a month-to-month regular basis. And not just the technology teams, but the teams supporting the customers day to day are now empowered with information to have those conversations.
Again, thank you, Mark, for hosting us. This is
You're very welcome.
a wonderful event. And thank you, Sheridan. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we will say goodnight.
Thank you.
Thank you.